The Galactic Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds before humanity even left its cradle. Their war banners hung over planets stripped of resistance. Their warships darkened the skies of countless civilizations, and their name was spoken in hushed, fearful tones across the stars. To them, Earth was nothing, a primitive world, isolated and insignificant. Its people were untested, its weapons outdated, its spirit assumed fragile. Emperor Zyrol leaned back in his ornate throne aboard the Dominance, his war flagship. A creature of regal stature, he regarded the holographic display before him with mild amusement. Floating above the polished obsidian table was an image of Earth, slowly rotating, its blue oceans shimmering in the artificial light. He found the planet unremarkable. They still use combustion engines, sneered General Vector, his 4 crimson eyes narrowing in distaste. His armor, a masterpiece of dark alloys and energy-reactive plating, gleamed under the chamber's cold glow. They barely have a presence beyond their moon. This isn't war, it's pest control. Laughter rippled through the Imperial War Council. Admirals and strategists, seasoned by centuries of intergalactic campaigns, traded mocking glances. To them, a civilization that had only recently begun exploring its own solar system was beneath notice. Zyrol tapped a clawed finger against the armrest of his throne. And yet, he mused, his voice silken and edged with curiosity. They refused surrender. A flicker of silence settled over the council. It was true. When the Empire's envoys had delivered their ultimatum, subjugation or annihilation, the humans had not bowed. They had listened, impassive, before delivering a single message in return. No threats, no pleas, just a single, defiant word. Amused, Zyrol exhaled a slow breath. How very human. He turned his gaze toward the vast viewing window, where the pale blue planet hung in space. Let us educate them. The invasion began at dawn, the Empire's warships descending like titanic shadows upon the world. Capital cities across the planet found themselves cast in darkness as towering vessels blocked the sky. Earth's leaders, outmatched in every conceivable way, were given one final opportunity to kneel. They did not. General Vector, overseeing the invasion from his personal dreadnought, found the resistance almost insulting in its inadequacy. Human forces were deployed, yes, but what hope did they have? Imperial soldiers, clad in energy-absorbent armor, marched into the streets of New York, London, Beijing. Their weapons, powered by centuries of refinement, could vaporize a man in an instant. And yet the humans did not flee. They did not beg. They watched. A creeping unease coiled at the edges of Vector's mind as he observed their silent defiance. He dismissed it. Fear, after all, made lesser beings act irrationally. The first shots were fired. Imperial forces advanced with calculated precision, their movements methodical. Buildings trembled under the impact of heavy artillery. Energy projectiles searing through the air. Civilians scattered, though fewer than expected. Pockets of human resistance emerged, but their primitive ballistic weaponry could do little against the Empire's superior technology. It was over before it had begun, or so they thought. Minutes passed, then an hour. Reports trickled in from various battlefronts, confusing, fragmented. Units lost contact. Squads disappeared. Anomalies disrupted comms. Then the first distress signals began flooding in. Vector frowned, examining the reports. The patterns were wrong. The humans were not fighting conventionally. There were no large-scale engagements, no desperate last stands. Instead, small strike teams moved with eerie precision, striking from the shadows before vanishing without a trace. Impossible, an officer muttered, staring at the data feeds. Their weapons shouldn't even penetrate our shields. And yet, one by one, Imperial units were falling. Not to brute force, but to something far worse. Tactics. In London, an entire squadron of elite Imperial warriors was eliminated in under 3 minutes, neutralized before they could even raise their weapons. In Beijing, drone swarms dismantled enemy armor with terrifying efficiency. In New York, sniper fire eliminated officers with mechanical precision, leaving troops leaderless and disoriented. The Empire had expected a primitive, desperate resistance. What they faced instead was an enemy that understood them too well. On board the Dominance, Zyrol watched the unfolding battle with narrowed eyes. Reports continued to pour in, each more disturbing than the last. This was not the disorganized struggle of a lesser species. It was something else, something calculated. His claws tapped against his throne. "Recall the ground forces," he commanded, his voice quiet yet firm. "Something is wrong." But it was already too late. General Vector stood rigid on the command deck of his dreadnought, his four crimson eyes locked onto the unfolding chaos below. It had taken precisely 7 minutes for the Empire's perfect war machine to falter. Units that should have been unstoppable were now scrambling for cover, breaking formation, their once imposing ranks splintered by an enemy that should have been crushed underfoot. He gritted his teeth. This was not how it was supposed to go. "Status report," he barked. The nearest officer, her scaled skin paler than usual, hesitated before answering. "Sir, she swallowed. "We're losing control of the battlefield." Vector refused to believe it. He turned back to the display, watching the bright red markers, his soldiers, vanish one by one. The humans were ghosts. They didn't march in neat formations, nor did they engage in prolonged firefights. They struck from the shadows, delivered a killing blow, then melted away before retaliation could come. They moved with inhuman precision, as though they had already anticipated every decision the Empire would make. A video feed flickered onto the main screen, helmet footage from a squadron deployed in New York. The troopers had secured a government building, expecting a final, desperate resistance from the locals. Instead, the shadows themselves came alive. The first Imperial soldier collapsed without a sound, a thin dart protruding from the seam of his armor. The second went down an instant later, his throat slashed by something too fast to see. The third spun, firing wildly, but his energy bolts struck only empty air. The last thing the feed captured was a single, brief flash, a figure clad in sleek, black armor, before the screen went dark. Vector clenched his fists. "Who are they?" Another officer stiffened, eyes darting nervously across data streams. "We're picking up human transmissions. They call them Tier 1 operators." He swallowed. "They are specialized." Specialized. The word felt inadequate. This was not the desperate resistance of a dying species. This was execution. "Deploy heavy infantry," Vector snarled. "Burn the city to the ground if you have to." But even as he spoke, another alarm flared to life. This one from orbit. The Dominance trembled. A new voice cut through the rising panic. One from the fleet's orbital command. "Admiral, we are under attack. Unidentified projectiles inbound. High-velocity impacts detected on multiple hulls." Vector's blood ran cold. There should have been nothing in this system capable of attacking an Imperial fleet. Earth's Navy was a joke, barely capable of reaching Mars, let alone engaging a fleet in open space. And yet, the Dominance shook again, a thunderous impact reverberating through the deck. A second later, a section of the viewport darkened as a ship, one of theirs, exploded in a silent bloom of fire and debris. Vector turned sharply. "What is hitting us?" "Railgun rounds," an officer rasped, disbelief lacing his voice. "Sir, they have—" The feed cut out. Zyrol, watching from the command throne, spoke at last. "Show me." The screen shifted, displaying the source of the attack. At first, it looked like debris, fragments of old satellites and defunct stations. Then the image sharpened, revealing sleek, angular constructs, their surfaces dark to the point of near invisibility against the void. Railguns embedded within their frames glowed faintly from heat discharge, sending round after round hurtling into the Empire's fleet with terrifying accuracy. These were not primitive satellites. They were weapons platforms. Zyrol exhaled slowly. They hid their true capabilities. The realization settled over the command chamber like a heavy shroud. The humans had not been outmatched, nor had they been overwhelmed. They had played the Empire like a game of chess. baiting them into revealing their strategy before striking back with calculated brutality. Another ship exploded. Vecna whirled to his officers. "All vessels, execute emergency maneuvers. We cannot remain stationary." A new transmission cut across his orders. The voice that came through was calm, measured. "This is Admiral Daniel Grayson of the United Terran Defense Fleet, a human, speaking as an equal." Zyral's eyes narrowed. "Your forces have invaded sovereign Terran territory without provocation," Grayson continued. "You were given a chance to leave. You chose war instead." Another railgun round struck, this time shearing straight through an imperial cruiser, cutting it in half before the explosion followed. Zyral said nothing. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was not the one dictating the terms. Grayson's voice remained level. "This is your final warning." Zyral's claws dug into his armrest. He had underestimated them. The whole Empire had. And now, the consequences were unfolding before his eyes. Silence filled the bridge of the dominance. The once invincible warship trembled beneath the relentless barrage of hyper-accelerated projectiles, each impact tearing through its once impervious hull. The Empire's forces were in full retreat, though retreat suggested some semblance of order. This was a rout. What had begun as a campaign of conquest had unraveled into sheer, unrelenting annihilation. General Vecna's claws dug into the command console, his breathing ragged. How? How had this happened? Humanity, backward, primitive, insignificant, had shattered the Empire's elite forces within minutes. There was no honor in this defeat, no gallant last stand. His soldiers were being butchered before they could so much as react. Entire battalions erased by an enemy that should have been cowering in fear. "Sir, the dominance cannot withstand another direct hit." The voice of his second-in-command was tight, controlled. But beneath the discipline, Vecna could hear it. Fear. The same fear that had crept into his own mind. Another explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered. Vecna forced himself to move. Initiate emergency withdrawal. Now, a flicker of hesitation. Then, action. Across the remnants of the fleet, the few surviving Imperial warships engaged their FTL drives, tearing themselves free of the system like wounded beasts fleeing a predator. Some did not make it, obliterated by the relentless human counterattack before they could escape. And still, Admiral Daniel Grayson had not spoken again. He didn't need to. Humanity's answer had been given in blood and fire. On board the Dominance, Emperor Zyral remained seated, his expression unreadable as he watched his empire's finest warships fall one after another. His golden eyes flickered over the battlefield, not with anger, but with cold calculation. He had ruled for centuries. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched civilizations collapse beneath the weight of their own arrogance. Now it seemed it was the Empire's turn. He let out a slow breath. "In transmission," he said softly. The battle was over, and the Empire had lost. Far below, on the surface of Earth, the last remnants of the Imperial ground forces collapsed into disarray. What had once been a grand invasion had become a desperate struggle for survival. Those who surrendered were taken prisoner. Those who did not were erased without hesitation. For the first time in its long and bloody history, the Galactic Empire had been humbled, and humanity had revealed its true face. In the weeks that followed, the echoes of the battle spread across the galaxy. Imperial dominion, once unchallenged, now bore the stain of failure. Fear rippled through the lesser vassal species, whispers of Earth's victory traveling faster than any fleet. Some saw it as the beginning of the Empire's end. Others saw it as something far more dangerous. A shift, a change in the balance of power. In the grand halls of the Imperial capital, Zyral stood before the assembled High Council, his expression impassive. "Henceforth," he declared, his voice carrying across the chamber, "Earth is to remain untouched. No further campaigns shall be waged against humanity." Murmurs of dissent rippled through the council, but none dared challenge him outright. He had seen what they had not. He had felt it. A war with humanity was not a war the Empire could afford to fight. In the darkness of space, amidst the debris of shattered warships and the silent graves of fallen soldiers, Earth stood unbroken. And for the first time, the galaxy understood the truth. Humanity was not prey. They were the storm,